Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on getting back on track and supporting staff with their well-being. My name is Shabana. I'm the Programme Manager at GetSet UK. GetSet UK was established in 2009, and we provide a variety of community-related services and supporting them with their well-being, employability, and training. The Working Well service is one of these services, which tackles mental health well-being in the workplace, which this webinar is an introduction to. I'll be talking more on the service later on in the session. So quickly, I'm just going to go over this for 1 hour. 45 minutes of it will be allocated to our speaker, Kevin. You can see on the screen right now. 15 minutes of that will be allocated for comments and questions at the end in regards to this session. What I want you to do is use the chat facility, which is part of Zoom. I will be manning that throughout this session. I want you to think about the challenges that you possibly can come across or are coming across in regards to staff well-being, and we can discuss those as part of the question and comments segment of this session. The slides for the session are available. If there's anything that you want from the session, from the slides, I'm happy to email those out to you after. And finally, I would like to ask you to turn off your mics and camera. Okay, so without further ado, let me introduce you to Kevin. So Kevin is the co-founder of Big Dog Little Dog, a social enterprise that delivers employment-related mental health training around London and beyond. He has a broad occupational background from the police to public house management and has lived experience of severe depression and anxiety. A popular public speaker, Kevin has a client list which includes central government, local authorities, multinationals and small businesses. In 2012, he was awarded a fellowship by Institute of Employability Professionals, and in 2019 by the Royal Society of Arts for his outstanding commitment to helping people return to work after experiencing mental health problems and improving how individuals approach mental health in the workplace. Okay, Kevin, over to you.
Lovely, thanks Shabana, and good morning everyone. As Shabana says, we have got a chat facility down here. Because this is Zoom, there's also a Q&A. We're not using the Q&A. So if you do have any questions from today's session, please pop them in chat. Shabana's going to keep an eye on them. If you want to go into chat to discuss what's appearing on screen, Shabana will be in there. If you just want to focus on what I'm saying and what's appearing on screen, that's fine as well. So welcome to this 1 hour webinar. This is kind of a part two. We were delivering webinars on behalf of GetSet during lockdown. A webinar we called the Dickens Perspective that focused on how to support the mental health of your staff while they're working from home. Today, we've taken a natural chronological leap forward. So we're going to kick off today by thinking about COVID-19 lockdown and unlock. Why might there be mental health challenges present? From there, we're going to look at something called the Tuckman model, which we used on the previous webinar. We're going to use it in a different context today and really see how it helps us structure our thinking around how to unlock the workplace safely. Part of that Tuckman model, one of the stages is known as norming, and that is going to be the key focus for today. Thinking about how we can make the most of the norming phase that we're going to hit and how we might be able to speed our way through to ultimately get to the final performance. We will touch on the mourning phase of the Tuckman model, where people are returning to the workplace having been at home for some months and thinking about the aspects of that they're going to miss and what you might be able to do about it. And finally, I'll hand back to Shabana to give an overview of the Working Well service and how this fully funded service might be helpful to you guys in the days, weeks and months ahead. So, first of all, the mental health consequences of COVID, of lockdown, of unlock. Now, there are over 200 different mental health disorders. If we were to look at the main families of disorders, I'm sure they're categories that you've heard of before. More than that, I'm sure you've heard of many of the disorders that fit in those categories. And you might have staff who have any one of those, or more than one as a diagnosis. What mental health consequences might lockdown introduce? Well, that's predominantly around these two families. the low mood that lockdown might have brought, the anxieties that unlocking might bring. So they're our key focus for today. They're known as the common mental health disorders. And just to give some kind of perspective, of all the people in this country with a diagnosis, about 90% have a diagnosis of a common mental health disorder as opposed to a severe and enduring disorder. When we delivered the Dickens Perspective webinar, we called it that because of A Christmas Carol and the ghosts of Christmas past, present and future. And this is still very relevant for today's session. The depressive effects of lockdown, where might they have come from? Well, first of all, some people already had mental health challenges before lockdown began. Being away from workplace resources and the ability to do the job as we're used to has an effect on our mood. And also a major part of the first webinar was to introduce these 5 latent mental health benefits of being at work. And we argued that actually those 5 mental health benefits are of the workplace, not just of work. And I'll show you them again shortly later. Right now, people in lockdown might be having their mental health affected through a personal interaction with COVID. They might have had it. They might have lost a loved one through it. They might be furloughed because of it. Obviously, the absence of social contact is not good for our mental health. And for some people, working from home or being furloughed happens in a far from ideal environment where there might be multiple people there, multiple distractions. Home might even be a dangerous place to be, thinking of things like domestic violence and addiction. So there's a range of factors that have been going on that could have a negative impact on our mental health. And as we unlock, the main thing is around fear and anxiety. People are getting worried about, once I do have to return to work, might I catch the virus? They might be anxious about just coming back to work. There may be features of the workplace they were glad to escape. And then there may be anxieties around getting my life back to being workplace friendly. Will my childcare provider still have spaces, for instance? So we've got a range of different directions that these mental health challenges might be coming from for our staff. Then just thinking briefly about where we are right now in the timeline. First of all, I think of this as a bit of a seesaw we're on at the moment. And on one side of the seesaw, we say we need to stay alive, we need to beat this virus. But on the other side of the seesaw, we need the economy, we need businesses to stay intact. So we're unlocking despite the fact that no one's sure that it's the right thing to do. General public are worried. We're in unprecedented times. We could have conversations about how the government are doing, but any government that was in power right now would be making decisions that there is no previous history to base on. We're seeing these second waves happening at very local and large scale levels. So people are getting anxious that lockdown might happen again. And I don't know about you, but I'm finding when I do go out and I go to shops now, people don't seem to be social distancing so much anymore. Far more people not wearing masks in shops. Have people entered this flippancy mode? And it may be coincidence that that seems to have happened since the whole Dominic Cummings episode. So we're in uncertain times, and uncertainty breeds anxiety. We are going to focus on the Tuckman model and how it's of use now. And here is that Tuckman model, which you've probably heard of. Most people refer to it as forming, storming, norming, performing. And the Tuckman model was really created to think about the stages that a team goes through when you bring them together to complete a task. But what we're going to look at now is how this is just as applicable to unlocking the workplace from a staff perspective. And we're going to particularly focus on the norming phase. So first of all, that forming phase. What do we mean by that? This is that honeymoon period we're likely to begin, where people are excited about coming back to work. People are finally going to get out of the house, get back to see the people that they work with, having a life outside of the 4 walls. And I mentioned those 5 latent mental health benefits of work. So as we get people back in the workplace, we are reintroducing them to those 5 latent benefits. And here they are briefly. This is the theory that work and the workplace bring these 5 things to our life, which are good for our mental health, and they have been missing during lockdown. So that forming period, initial excitement, staff can't wait to get back. We will then almost inevitably move into this storming phase. Storming is when that honeymoon period's over and we start seeing the cracks in our grand design. People are getting worried and realizing that there might be some risks to their safety going on. They've got to get a childcare provision sorted out, a carer in for any adult caring responsibilities, a dog walker. This is a huge one that we're going to see. People returning to commuting, where they might have had 6 months of none of it and they've realised how much they dislike it. Plus, of course, the COVID risks that commuting bring with it. And for some, there'll be features of the workplace that they don't want to come back to. Maybe their work environment isn't as nice as home. Maybe there are people in the workplace, customers and colleagues, that they've been glad to be away from. Maybe there's been bullying in the workplace. So we will have a phase where it isn't so rosy anymore. And what we need to do is move our organisation from that into that new normal that people talk about. And that's what the norming phase is all about in Tottenham. Norming for us in this context, how can we shorten down that storming phase and get to a functioning business again? And I'm going to come back to this. We're going to go into some detail on norming, but the kinds of things we're thinking about here. How can we be talking to staff to understand their fears? How can we make sure that work environment is as COVID safe as possible? And we'll look at a tool soon on how we might think about who returns, when is it appropriate for specific people to come back to the workplace. And we need that norming phase if we're to then move in to performing. What do we mean by performing in this context? Well, this is that new normal. What it may look like. Our organisations are functioning effectively again. For some organisations, maybe better than before lockdown began. Home working has had to happen a lot in the last 6 months, and for some people, they've not been able to be as efficient being away from the office. But we have seen that some people have thrived working from home. And one of the hopes we've got for the new normal is that organisations will reflect back on lockdown and identify, actually, there are some good features we might want to keep, and home working may be one of them. It may be under the new normal that some social distancing measures remain. Years ago, I used to teach food safety training. And before my learners turned up, I used to sprinkle a powder around on the doorknobs and community areas. Didn't tell them I'd done it. And throughout the day's training, and we'd have breaks, they'd go to the toilet, they'd wash their hands. And at the end of the session, I used to pass around an ultraviolet torch, and they'd see just how much of that dust was still on their hands. And I think what we've been through in the last 6 months has kind of educated the public more around how easily disease can spread. Also, a big hope for us is that during these 6 months, we've tested new ways of working, and we've actually found that some of them are really fantastic. Video conferencing, webinars, video training are prime examples of things that many of us didn't do and maybe didn't trust before lockdown, but now might become an absolute part of normal working day life. One London borough that we work with has reported a significant number of commercial landlords really struggling now because so many local businesses are terminating their leases. They've actually looked at lockdown and said, maybe I don't need as much space as I've used today. Maybe if I can use some home working within some roles. So this is a unique, once in a lifetime opportunity for us to learn from lockdown and critically ask ourselves, is there a better way of doing this? I showed you the morning phase as well. So just to mention morning. Morning in the context of the pure Tuckman model. I mentioned that the Tuckman model was developed around bringing a team together to complete a task. So when that task is completed, you break the team up. So the morning phase of the Tuckman model is dealing with people missing being in that team. Translate it into our context. So what we're really thinking about now is when people are required to return to work, there will be some aspects of working from home that they'll miss, and a few examples appearing on your screen now. So we do want to give some thought to what can we do to minimize that morning. A couple of examples there. So you might think about phased returns where someone might carry on working from home 4 days a week and come in 1 day and slowly shift that balance to wherever optimum is. Another interesting example there about starting the day with video meetings. If people travel outside of rush hour, they're still commuting, but maybe some of their dislike of commuting and some of the COVID risk might be lower with less people on the train. So we do need to think about that morning phase. But now let's come back and spend some proper time thinking about the main phase that I mentioned today, this norming phase. This is the bit that if we do this right, we can speed up unlock and get our organisations working effectively despite the challenges we've been through. In thinking about that unlock, there's a range of different factors we need to consider. We need to make sure that the work environment is as COVID safe as possible. How we expect people to go about their work may have to change to make it COVID safe. People's actual job roles may change. Maybe their working hours might change. For some of you, I'm sure interaction with public is a vital part of your organisation. So how do you safeguard the public as you unlock the workplace? But also, how do you safeguard yourselves from the public? And I say again about that commuting risk. I was delivering a webinar a few weeks ago to a central London local authority. And one of the delegates on that was saying, well, I'm now going to be cycling instead of getting the bus. But then I get to a part on my route where I have no choice. I've got to get on the tube. And at that point, I'm not fully in control. And it's a valid point. The Health and Safety Executive have published some guidance on working safely during COVID. And the link's at the bottom of the screen there. As Shabana said, she's going to show you her email address at the end of this webinar. By all means, email her for a copy of this slide deck as a PDF and visit that link. The government have set these 6 pillars, these 6 aspects for you to consider to make your workplace COVID secure. First of all, and we'll come on to this next, COVID specific risk assessment. Secondly, looking at that workplace, this isn't just about putting some tape on the floor to ensure 2 meters, putting up screens. This might be changing many different aspects of your workplace, not just physically, but in terms of those processes and work procedures I mentioned. There needs to be a focus on, ultimately, how do we ensure that nobody walks into the building with COVID and that nobody leaves the building having come in clean, but leaves the building with the virus. This is a huge piece for me, the whole consultative piece. How are we talking with our employees to hear their anxieties, to hear their ideas, to bounce our ideas off of them, tell them where our thinking's at. The government message is still, you must not mandate someone to return to work. So working from home is still an option for staff. And although shielding has lessened now, that doesn't mean that those people who were in the shielding category no longer have those health concerns. So we still do need to keep those people in mind as we're doing our risk assessment. Now, apologies if I teach you how to suck eggs for a minute now, but I just want to spell out the 3 elements of good risk assessment. And this doesn't matter whether it's a health and safety risk assessment, a fire safety risk assessment, a suicide risk assessment, or indeed a COVID risk assessment. 3 factors we need to consider: hazard, impact, and risk. And just to be clear on what we mean by those 3 things. A hazard is something or someone that could cause harm. In the context of COVID, it's something or someone that could lead to a person catching the virus. By impact, we mean if that harm does happen, how much will it hurt? And by risk, what's the probability that that harm is going to happen? They are the 3 factors we need to consider in risk assessing how we're running our organisation. And to say again, this isn't just about the environment. Risk assessment for COVID in a nutshell is this. First of all, those hazards. Really, there are 3 types of hazards in your workplace, the 3 Ps: the place, the practice, the people. So the physical environment, how people are expected to go about their work, and the people themselves. They are the 3 things that could potentially cause harm. In terms of impact, whenever we identify a hazard, we're asking, if this does come true, is the impact going to be high, medium, or low? And please do consider the 2-way flow between those 2 branches. So how could the hazard create an impact? How could a place, a practice, or a person create impact? But also, what impact would it have on the place, practice, or person? So there's very much a 2-way flow there. Once we know our hazards and we know their potential impact, we can then say, so what's the risk? Again, high, medium, or low. What's the chances of this happening? And good risk assessment for COVID should say, can we remove the hazard? If not, can we avoid the hazard? Failing that, how do we reduce the risk? Key bits about the place, risk assessing the workplace. I've already mentioned it a couple of times, but please do consider each member of staff, what are their travel options? What hazards might they face from the moment they open their front door to the moment they walk into the workplace? If you've got members of staff who work in different locations on different days, you should be risk assessing each of those routes with the member of staff to identify the hazard, the impact, the risk. Within your workplace, I've used this flash phrase, tactile contact contagion. In other words, what could people touch and get the virus from? Social contact contagion, where in the workplace is there a high chance that someone could catch the virus from another person? Please do consider airborne hazards. We still don't know this virus well enough to know it inside out. But things like air conditioning, anything that recirculates the air, anything that causes the air to move, if someone who is infected coughs or sneezes, where's that going to go? So we do need to consider that. Then we've got, can we remove, can we avoid, or at worst, how can we minimize the risk? Critical question. Is that risk then low enough? And if it's not, we shouldn't be opening the workplace. Please do keep your finger on the pulse in terms of what resources are available out there. There's a bit of a supply and demand thing going on at the moment. So there is currently, would you believe, a worldwide shortage of perspex. But equally, there are new tools and resources being released on almost a weekly basis, new ways that people are creating barriers to fight this virus. In terms of risk assessing our working practices, really there are 4 aspects to consider here. First of all, the working practices in terms of space. What I'm thinking about mainly here is how many people are in a room at any given moment in time. What about corridors where people may pass each other? I know of one local authority in London that has a huge building with 5 lifts that are notoriously slow. Like, you've got to turn up 20 minutes before the meetings if you're anywhere above the 4th floor. As part of their risk assessment, currently, some people are allowed back to work, only 1 person in the lift at a time. Think about tasks for your working procedures. How do people do their work? Do any of those tasks carry a COVID risk? And if so, what can we do about it to remove, avoid, or reduce? The resources used to get the job done, are they COVID friendly? Are there other resources that could be used that could lower the risk? And please also, the one that people miss out is time. Think about people's working hours. And how can we make sure that those working hours reduce the risk as much as possible? So the classic example, which I've already alluded to earlier, is rush hour. In this day and age, a lot of organisations no longer have to open at 9 and close at 5 Monday to Friday. There's a lot more flex. So let's look at what people's working hours are. And if we can get people commuting outside of rush hour, we're reducing risk. Then we get on to risk assessing people. A little quote for you there. We're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. I'd like to take credit for that, but I found it on the internet. What a great phrase to sum up where we are at the moment with COVID and lockdown. We're all in the same situation, but we've all got different journeys back to whatever normal looks like. And that's a key point when it comes to risk assessing people. Every single one of us has our own way of looking at the world, our own sense of normal. So when you encounter anxieties in staff, they may not be anxieties for you. What's really important to bear in mind is that's their truth. And we need to see things from their angle and support them if there are some false anxieties going on or some over anxieties. We need to be able to support people to look at it from a different perspective. Here's the key model I'd suggest you use in thinking about who comes back to work. This is a biaxial quadrant system. So I'll talk you through the 2 axes and then the 4 quadrants. So this vertical axis, what I'd encourage you to do is think of every job role in your organisation. Forget who does that job for a moment, just the job role, and ask yourself where they sit on this scale. Where at one extreme, this job can only be done in the workplace. Typically, there are only 2 types of job roles that sit there. Either key worker roles that have been working throughout lockdown, or people whose roles have been furloughed. By definition, they couldn't do their job, therefore they got furloughed. So at that extreme, the role has to be done in the workplace. At the other extreme, we might find that the role has worked better working from home. My daughter is an insurance broker, and she's been working from home for the last 6 months and is turning in the best performance she ever has. She's no longer got colleagues walking up to her, interrupting her, those pesky customers walking in the door. She is performing better than she ever did when she was in the office. And we can plot every job role in our organisation somewhere on that line. The horizontal axis isn't about job role. This is about the human beings. So thinking about the people in your organisation, forgetting what job they do, where do they sit on the horizontal axis? Where at one end, we've got a person who is gagging to come back to work and there's no reason why they can't. At the other extreme, you've got someone who can't return to work. Maybe they've got a health issue preventing them. Maybe there are practical reasons in their life that need to be overcome. Or they won't return, they don't want to come back. And that is largely around anxieties about coming back. And you could plot every member of your staff somewhere on that horizontal line. Once you finish doing that, obviously every member of staff has a job role. If you take your two plots together for each person, they end up in one of the 4 quadrants of this model. And that top right quadrant is the no-brainer. If the member of staff wants to return, there's no reason why they can't, and the role is needed to be done in the workplace. If government allow, bring that person back. Bottom right quadrant, we've got someone keen and able to return, but the job was working better remotely. Well, there's some negotiation to do there, maybe even some split between working from home some of the week and coming into the workplace some of the week. That bottom left quadrant, person can't or won't return to work, and actually the job works better at home. So why would you bring them back if the role is working better from home? It's that top left quadrant where the challenge particularly is, where the role needs to be done in the workplace, but either the person can't or the person doesn't want to return. And that's where we need to look at either the practical support we can offer to turn can't into can, or the emotional support we can offer to turn won't into will. So it's an interesting little grid. We have developed this also, so if you do want to formally use this in your organisation and involve the staff in doing it, we've created the tables that you can put the data in and some simple instructions. So if this is a model that you think this would be of use to us, drop Shabana a line with the email at the end, and we'll make sure you get a copy of that. In terms of those people over on the left who don't want to return, the kind of anxieties we're typically seeing as Britain unlocks. People are getting anxious about going outside again. If I go outside again, I might get the virus. If I get the virus, I might die. I've mentioned already, some people are getting anxious about the commute because it increases risk of COVID. Some people are just getting anxious about the commute because they've realised how much they hate it. There are concerns amongst some people about how social distancing, etc., is going to work in the workplace. So going back over the contents of this webinar, if we're carrying out this risk assessment, if we're doing good, clear consultation, we can influence whether this anxiety happens or not. The more your staff can see the planned approach, the consultation, the measures you're putting in place, the less those anxieties will be. Mentioned a couple of times, some people are getting anxious about those work-life logistics, getting them back in place so that they can return to work full-time. Furloughed staff, I'll mention briefly in a minute anyway. Concerns about their job security, but beyond just furloughed staff, we are now officially in recession. We are likely to go back to a new way of working. more than just furloughed staff are worrying about whether their job's safe for the future. And then the final anxiety we're seeing is all the time COVID's in the news, some people won't be able to focus back on life fully. And the World Health Organization have clearly said we may never see the back of COVID, just as we've never seen the back of HIV. So the more we're talking with our staff to understand what anxieties they've got, the more we can support them in some areas, reassure them in some areas, give them further information to maybe challenge any of those anxieties that might be unfounded. When we delivered the Dickens Perspective webinar, we showed those 5 latent benefits of work and broke them into 2 categories, routine and social integration. And we argued why they were at risk during home working. What we said was when people are at work, these benefits of having a routine are in place. When you're not in the workplace, including potentially working from home, there's a risk that these ones develop instead. And I wanted to show them again today now, because if that's come true and you've got staff who are now in the red zone, part of your challenge is moving them back into the green zone. Spotting any of those red factors amongst your staff and supporting them to get back the way things were back into that green zone. The other half of the 5 latent benefits was social integration. So the same again, pre-lockdown, we had these kind of benefits of the workplace going on in terms of meeting our social needs. Being out of the workplace, including working from home, created the risk of these ones developing instead. And again, I'll show you those in part 2 webinar to make you aware that you may encounter some of these deficits going on as staff return to work. And a key challenge for you is how do you move red into green? One slide on furloughed staff, and then I'm going to hand you over to Shabana to tell you a little bit about the Working Well service. We all know what we mean by furloughed staff. I'm not sure it's a word we particularly knew before lockdown, but everyone knows it now. Why do they get their own slide on this session? We made the point in the first webinar. Here we've got people who for an amount of time have lost a chunk of their reason for being. In a similar way that empty nest syndrome does that for a parent when the final child leaves home, we have people who have been furloughed who had a hole in their life where their job used to be. So you may find furloughed staff's mental health has suffered as a result of that. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, these are the people likely to be the most anxious about the future of their job. So please, key with furloughed staff, be honest with them. Support them to come back into the workplace. They might need to come back into the workplace a little gradually. To go from 0 miles per hour to 60 is quite a challenge. And if you're not returning to the workplace, if you are going to be making them redundant, I would encourage you to be having that conversation as early as possible to give sufficient time for that person to connect with appropriate support to ensure some job continuity. That's me done. I'm going to hand over to Shabana to tell us a bit about Working Well before we deal with any questions and chat. Shabana, over to you.
Hi everyone, back again. As Kevin just mentioned and what I mentioned in the introduction, this webinar is an introduction to our Working Well service, which we are delivering in Barnet at the moment. The Working Well service essentially is a job retention and wellbeing service aimed at Barnet-based businesses. It's fully funded through the Barnet Council Public Health. It is a pilot service, so there's limited time to deliver it and there's limited spaces as well. And again, it's exclusive to Barnet organisations. The service provides like a cost-free toolkit, which has a bunch of resources, tools, and guidance and tailored guidance in managing staff wellbeing in the workplace, and that includes mental health. As part of the service, you also get a business support manager, who is myself. I help you to identify areas of improvement within the workplace. That could mean, and then helping to amend them as well using that same toolkit. So the areas that we look into are recruitment processes, staff and management competencies, legal compliances, and procedures and policies. The toolkit does contain templates of policies and procedures, so you don't think you have to spend time typing it up and things like that. It's just implementing those, and I can guide you through that process. The other element of the service is the progression coach. The progression coach provides a holistic guidance and counselling service to your employees. So she helps to identify areas of support in their quality of life, personal well-being, as well as working environment, and giving support in these areas. The aim of the service is essentially to give organisations the knowledge and tools to deal with mental well-being in the workplace and create a more healthy, open and inclusive working environment for all employees. The service was designed so that by implementing the recommendations that I make, you'll be able to try and gain accreditation and recognition for the changes that you've made. So some of this accreditation includes Mayor of London Healthy Workplace Award, becoming member of Mindful Employer Charter, as well as Disability Confidence Accreditation. So you do get something else out of it for your business and recognition for the efforts that you put in. These tools, these recommendations are actually really simple. Once I discuss them with you, you'll realize that it's not as big as a lot of people may think. It's very simple sort of recommendations, but it's so beneficial for all your staff, and especially in this climate. The service was established prior to lockdown, so it's not something new to Barnet. It was something that was developed since November, but I have had more interest since lockdown. And I think this is because talking to SMEs since the lockdown, there's a greater realization of supporting mental well-being along with physical well-being. As a society, we are coming to a realization health is made up of both the physical and mental well-being. You're not healthy if both are not managed simultaneously. To support this, I'm happy to provide you with a complimentary employee well-being questionnaire to help you establish staff well-being needs in the workplace, and the progression coach can help identify and support those who are struggling with their mental health using this tool. So, you know, so this is my details. Please take down my details and get in contact with me. I will contact a lot of you after this session. Some of you I already have booked in for next week to talk about the Working Well service as well as this webinar. I would love some feedback on this webinar, whether you join Working Well service or not. Again, I want to remind you, it's fully funded, so it's no cost to you. You get a whole bunch of resources and tools, just as you will be with this webinar as well. All the attendees who are not booked, as I said, I will contact you and see if I can book you in for next week or the week after. Please take down my details. Any questions or anything like that, please put it into the chat and we'll try and discuss those. If you have any questions after this session, please email me and I'll try and get back to you, or Kevin will get back, you know, with Kevin. I'll answer those questions. Okay, Kevin, back to you.
Thanks, Shabana.
No problem.
So yeah, just to mention again, that Working Well service, it's an innovative pilot. Public Health are funding it. This is all about how can Get Set support you and your workplace. How can your workplace be more mental health friendly? How can any of your staff who might be struggling turn struggling into thriving? So do have a look at that. Shabana, how was chat?
Bit quiet. However, I have I'm trying to like preempt what they might be thinking. So one of the questions I'll put to you is, how would you go about monitoring staff well-being?
Ask them. This is the massive one that we always see. There are so many tools out there that are developed by academics to supposedly measure stuff, and some of them are really effective, but there is no better way of gauging staff well-being than asking.
Exactly. And the questionnaire that I'm providing will help you do that and start that conversation. And it can be used from management all the way down to lower levels staffing as well.
And a really nice thing with the borough you're in is
Yeah.
it's quite a well-connected borough. So where public health funding gets set for this, there are also a wealth of connections into things like the Talking Therapies service. There's a wonderful one-stop shop up in Hendon of health services that Shabana and the progression coach are connected with. So there's a real pan-borough approach to this, where these guys can be a one-stop gateway to enable your staff to access applicable support.
Yeah, adding to that, this service does provide you with a directory. So you have myself and the progression coach who will introduce you to local services, but we do provide you with a electronic directory of all these places. So you can signpost your staff, and you always have that tool in your workplace that even your staff can have access to and self-refer should they want to. Yeah. Another question I have for you, how often do you have to monitor your staff well-being?
I think that's an incredibly open and dynamic question in the times we're in.
Yeah.
So, before we'd ever heard of COVID, I think that question asked, it depended on the job role and the state of the business, the stability of the business, and what was going on in people's life. Now, I would say almost you can't ask often enough.
Going back to, you know, the challenges we are facing now, post lockdown, how would businesses who are, you know, putting redundancies forward or going through redundancies, how would they support their staff? Because I'm sure a lot of them may not, you know, don't want to get rid of the staff, but have no choice to.
Yeah, I think there's a key point to acknowledge here, that a lot of the funders have spent a lot of the last 6 months realigning what they're going to spend their money on. And I'll use the National Lottery as a great example. Back in April, May, Big Lottery said, for at least the next 6 months, the only thing we're going to fund is a COVID response service. So if you want money, if it's not to do with responding to COVID, don't bother coming to us. So there's a key message there about staying aware of what new services are being funded. And I think that's another nice use for GetSet, that they've got their finger on the pulse and can be making local businesses aware as new schemes come out. We've got a question in chat as well about, are there guidelines for social groups run by volunteers for the over 70s? Now, Age Concern often do some good groups in this area, but I do think if you want to take that one away, Shabana, and speak with public health, knowing the commissioner of this service, if there is such a thing within the borough, she'll know all about it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of new schemes that Barnet Public Health have come up with during this period because of all the challenges that everyone is facing, the community in Barnet is facing. And luckily, because I have direct line with them, I get that information. I can get that information to you quite quickly as well. And I will be, you know, anyone that's part of the service, I will be updating you with all the new service as we go along and as developments happen. The good thing about this service is that it's adaptable to, you know, the challenges that we face in COVID-19. Whether we go through another spike and we're going through another lockdown, we can continue delivering this service, and elements of this service, we've adapted it as it goes along. And the good thing about working with a pilot program is your information that you give to me, whether you like things or you don't like things, informs this program. So if there's anything that you don't like, even about today's webinar, that you would have wanted more information on, you know, feel free to drop me a line. I'm happy to discuss that with you and see how that informs future work that we do. Going back to you, Kevin, this is something that's your area of expertise. What training is available for staff and management in regards to well-being, mental health well-being?
So it won't be surprised for me to say that mental health is a hot topic. Everyone knows that, but it's never been more so. The traditional program that a lot of organisations use is called Mental Health First Aid. That's in 26 countries around the world, available from a half day to a 1 day to a 2 day program. And if you haven't got mental health first aiders in your organisation, I thoroughly recommend it. The full 2-dayer, think of it as the mental health equivalent of physical first aid. You get trained how to spot someone in crisis, what to do in the moment, how to open the gateway to professional services. So well worth it. But we've also agreed, have we not, Shabana, that we can do some short, sharp mental health awareness training for businesses that sign up for this service as well.
Yes, that is complimentary as part of this Working Well service. So you can have general mental health awareness training, which Kevin delivers as part of this service.
Absolutely.
And then going forward, if you do identify staff members who you want to become leaders within your organisation in regards to staff well-being, there's further training that Big Dog Little Dog that Kevin's the director of, that can help with that.
Yeah, most definitely. We've got another question here. Do Barnet Public Health have anyone who can attend a small business and carry out the risk assessment instead of the onus being on the staff to carry out themselves? The short answer to that would be no. And the reason for that is everything we need to do around COVID fits into health and safety at work legislation, ensuring the health, safety and well-being of our staff. Therefore, the obligation is on the employer to ensure it happens. Doesn't mean you can't bring an external person in, but the ownership of it needs to be through yourself. What I would say about that risk assessment is the best way to start a COVID risk assessment is with your member of staff thinking about it first and doing what might be 60, 70, 80% of the work. Because let's respect that they know their role better than we do. So always start it at the staff level, then management input. There are people out there that you could buy in for a day rate. You can imagine they'd be very busy at the moment. But perhaps something we can also arrange through the service is maybe a half-day session on how to do that risk assessment.
Yeah, part of the Working Well service, just to make you aware, is helping you, develop risk assessment. So just as you have your normal physical risk assessment, the Working Well service and myself will help you develop questions within that risk assessment, which will identify staff well-being as well. And that's something that I can help you develop as part of your normal routines of risk assessment. And as Kevin is right, the start of it is all about your coming from your employees. Your employees know the environment the most. They are probably more aware of risks in their day-to-day work than anyone, any of the management probably is. And you do have to look at the risk in relation to each person's job role as well. So this is where I help you and guide you as a business support manager as part of the Working Well service. Just another reason why this resource needs to be utilised. And Barnet Public Health are, really encouraging all the Barnet SMEs to utilise the service while it's still free.
We've only got a couple of minutes left, so let's just deal with the other two questions hanging in the room. Sure. First of all, if you're a cooperative with no management, there must still be some form of governance where ultimately if the organisation was going wrong, someone would stand up and say, I'm responsible for this. And that's the area where the health and safety ownership needs to come from, and the risk assessment ownership. In terms of a business going into people's homes, plumbing and heating, social distancing good, wearing a mask good, anything else, yeah, I would devise a simple checklist that I send through to my customers in advance to say, please can you ensure that you do this to the route? Please can you tell me what the route is? If you're aware of each individual route, you can anticipate risk. Masks, great. Are we equipping people with disposable gloves? Are we equipping people with at least 70% proof isopropyl alcohol? I've got a big bottle of that here. How's that? 99.9% alcohol. We just have those bottles of atomizer bottles. keep in the pocket. That stuff kills viruses, including corona, quite literally on contact. At most, it will take about 30 seconds to work. So first of all, onus on the customer. Make sure they are preparing as safe a route as possible. Secondly, yeah, let's be thinking not just about masks, but absolutely any skin contact onto contagious surfaces or human beings. I think we're out of time.
Yeah.
So all that remains on behalf of Get Set UK is for Shabana and I to say thank you all very much for coming along. We hope you found it useful. Just a reminder, if you do want the slides from today, drop Shabana a line at shabana@getsetuk.co.uk. We have also been recording this. So if you do want to watch this back, drop Shabana a line and she'll send you a link to it.
Thank you, everyone. It was really nice seeing all of you attend. Thank
Thank
you.
you all and stay safe, please.
Yeah, please.
Thanks. Bye all.